By the end of Genesis chapter 27, Isaac unintentionally handed the family blessing down to his second born, that is Jacob. Something that was unusual since Esau, technically, the oldest and is entitled to this inheritance. Isaac was old, he was feeble, and he was blind, and he believed himself to be near the end of his life. And as such, the time had come to pass the blessing onto his second, or whoever will take on the covenant of the Lord. We find a bit of that in verses 1 to 4. Isaac told Esau to go into the field and hunt for him a fresh game or venison, and to prepare for him a delicious meal such that he can eat, one that he always loved, one that he always enjoyed. And on being satisfied, on having enjoyed the meal, that he may as well go ahead and bless him. Isaac, his wife, that is Rebekah, overheard the exchange between Isaac and Esau in verses 27, that is in verses 5. Unfortunately, though, Rebekah loved Jacob more than he did Esau. It's a shame that this family, there was parental favoritism. Same way as Isaac had more, he had favor over Esau, same for Rebekah, she had favor over Jacob. Unfortunately, and I don't encourage that. I don't encourage that, especially in the marriage. You should not have parental favoritism. This, over the years, as the Bible will testify to it, has caused issues. We'll see the same problems coming up with Jacob when he did show more love to Joseph than he did with the other kids. That so much so that they almost literally killed Joseph if it hadn't been, for the descendants of Esau to come and rescue and probably buy off Joseph as a slave. Back to the story. Before these twins, that is Esau and Jacob, were born, Rebekah received an oracle from the Lord, prophesying that the younger would serve the older. We'll see that in verses 23. So Rebekah decided to step in to help the prophecy along, as was the case with Abraham and Sarah. And you remember how Sarah with Hagar, as she brings about Hagar, that she may have an intimate relationship with Abraham so she could have a son through Hagar. These two try to help God accomplish the purposes and the will of God. As for Rebekah, as for Sarah and Hagar, you can find more details about in Genesis chapter 16, specifically verses 1 to 5. If you haven't watched episode 16, please pick it up on our YouTube channel, or you could do that on our website. For this particular verse, where Rebekah sort of tries to help out God accomplish his purposes, we'll find that in about verses 9 to 12. So Rebekah, she did compel. She decided, first of all, to come in and help God accomplish his purposes. In doing so, she compelled Jacob to participate in a scheme to devise Isaac into some sort of giving a blessing and pretending to be Esau. She sort of prepared a meal Isaac was expecting. And she sort of, she spiced it so much well that it actually tasted like venison, like, game beef, like game venison. She dressed Jacob in Esau's clothes to make him smell, like his brother Esau. Remember, Esau was a man of the field. So he actually had this, this smell of the field, this dirt, of the field. So he had to sort of make him smell just like Esau. Not only did she do that, she went ahead also and covered, she covered Jacob. Jacob had smooth hands. So she covered Jacob's hands, Jacob's neck with goaty skin to make him feel to the touch like the hairy Esau. Hairy. Esau was a hairy man. And so and that's exactly what the name Esau literally means. Hairy. Jacob, however, as we're going to see, he offered one objection about this plan. What if my dad finds out? What if he finds out that we are trying to scam him? And instead of blessing me, he proclaims a curse upon me. It is worth noting that Jacob's concern here is not about whether or not this action is moral, but rather his concern is only about what will happen if his father found out about the lie. Rebekah assured Jacob the curse will fall to her if and only if he's caught. And as such, she commanded him to obey and do what she says. When Jacob went to his blind father with the male, it seemed like the plan was doomed from the start, as we'll see. Isaac knew it was too soon for Esau to have returned, and the voice of this man claiming to be Esau, it sounded like Jacob, unfortunately. But Jacob still lied to the father's face that he was Esau. Jacob's deception about his identity is something God turned on him later in his life. We'll see that in Genesis chapter 29, verses 21 to 26, and Genesis chapter 32, that is verses 24 to 28. Isaac was finally convinced by, his son and his disguisedness. He was convinced by the hairy hands and the smell of the field that was on the clothes he had wore. We'll find that in verses 14 to 25. So he prayed for the great wealth, in grain and in the fat of the land. He also prayed for the one before to be the Lord over his brothers and other nations. Finally, unfortunately, Isaac passed on the promise that all who bless or all who curse, this one will receive the same in return. And we'll find that in verses 26 to 29. Moments after Jacob left, with these blessings from Isaac, after they've schemed and managed to beat up, their father, Esau returned with his own meal, with his own prepared venison. Shocked and shaking with anger, shame, Isaac realized he had been scammed. He had sort of been duped by his son Jacob. Esau was distraught, and he recalled the time Jacob actually, in quotes, cheated him out of the birthright, for he had bowled, for a bowl of red stew, and mocked the meaning of Jacob's name, which literally means the idol grabber. Or you could also say usurper, or he lies, or other translations would call it cheater. This is somewhat an ionic moment for Esau, since the oath to sell the birthright should have meant allowing Jacob to take the blessing in the first place. Anyways, Esau begged for his father for some kind of a blessing of his own, as we'll see that in verses 36 to 38, which he received, though sounded more like a curse. Esau and his descendants will be wanderers, living away from the moisture and the fat of the land. They will live by the sword, apparently, in that whatever is to ever gain in this life or in the life he is to live, he shall gain it through fighting, through the sword, through the shedding of blood. The sad end of the family strife lived out through the nations of Israel, unfortunately, and Edom. Even thousands, actually hundreds of years after Isaac died. Later on, we shall see how, when Israel was coming from Egypt, at the time they had been in Egypt as slaves, they had a shorter route to get to the promised land. And in going through that route, they were supposed to go through the land of the Edomites. Edomites are the descendants of Esau. one of the kings, the king of Edomites at that time came and met them, and he actually rejected the idea of them going through that path. And ever since then, there was a strife between these two. There was always a constant fighting and a constant strife between the Edomites and the Israelites until the last Edomite who was written in the Bible, and that was King Herod. We find about that King Herod in the times of Jesus. If you remember, the king that ordered the killing of all the young children at the time when Jesus was born, so as to destroy the possibility of Jesus Christ coming on the scene. Esau, the elder son, literally, he was heartbroken. He fell into a dark rage, committing himself to murder his brother, Jacob. He comforted himself in this idea after Isaac that should die. Of course, his mom Rebekah learned about it, and so he sent Jacob away, to her brother Laban in Paddan, where Jacob went and lived for almost 20 years. Unfortunately, at the time when Jacob was coming back, Rebekah had passed on. In fact, that was the last time Rebekah saw her beloved son Jacob. Fortunately, Isaac didn't die immediately. He actually lived on another 43 years after this incident. He came back when Isaac was still alive, but Rebekah unfortunately had passed on. So this, unfortunately, is the summary of this beautiful saga, this beautiful conspiracy between these four people. The mother, the father, and the two boys. You would really look at this story and wonder who actually is to blame. Is it the parents? Is it the children? Because in looking closely at this story, you would realize that Isaac clearly knew that the promise, of the covenant had been passed on to Jacob. Earlier on, when Rebekah was pregnant, within her womb, she had these two kids, fighting. They were exchanging. And her being disturbed, she went and inquired of the Lord. And the Lord told her, within your womb, there are two nations. One of them, the younger, is going to be served by the elder. So Jacob actually, Rebekah knew that Jacob was the one to be next in line. Same, Isaac knew that. But unfortunately, you see Isaac knowing very well who should actually be in line, he tried to steal that away from Jacob and give it to the elder son, Esau. But for what? For simply a male. But again, he's to blame for that. But again, also Rebekah is to be blamed because he tried to accomplish the purposes of God through deceit. He tried to help God. It was as though she was saying, God cannot accomplish that which he had promised Jacob to be unless we help him to do that. And helping him through deceit. That unfortunately put them both on the wrong side. You come to the kids themselves. Esau clearly knew he had sold off his birthright to his brother. Why should he be claiming for it now? Why should he be hungry that, he's been blessed and he hasn't been blessed when actually he had sold off his birthright? So he was also in wrong, claiming something that he had already willingly given up. You go to Jacob. Jacob quite clearly knew he was probably going to be the next in line. He had the consciousness to say no. We can see how he sort of objected first to the mother, and yet he still went ahead, knowing very well what he was doing and that it being wrong. Quite an interesting saga, an interesting conspiracy of this family. That is the summary of chapter 27.